Welcome to Back to the Bible with pastor and Bible teacher Bryan Clark. Today, Bryan shares wisdom from the book of James about the role of judgment in the Christian life. And later in our studio, he'll offer some key take-home points as he discusses today's message with Kara Whitney and Arnie Cole. Now let's begin today's study. Here's Bryan Clark.
Chapter 4, verse 11. Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. Verse 12. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you who judge your neighbor? He ends that discussion by asking the question, who are you to judge your neighbor? What made you think you were that person that has the ability to abolish God's law and institute your own law? Now, what does he mean by this question related to judging his neighbor? This is a concept that's really confused in our postmodern culture. As a matter of fact, you'll often hear even believers say, judge not, lest you be judged. And that motto, that mantra is used to say that you can't say anyone else's behavior is wrong. Judge not, lest you be judged. So what does that mean? Let's talk about that for a minute. It's really important to understand that when people in our culture say that, it's built upon a philosophical belief that there are no moral absolutes. And because there are no moral absolutes, everybody's free to decide for themselves what's right and wrong, what's good and evil. Therefore, if each of us can function as our own God and decide for ourselves what's right and wrong, then we have no right to say to someone else, your way's wrong. The idea of judge not lest you be judged is built on the idea that there are no moral absolutes. What James is saying is the polar opposite of that. It turns it exactly upside down. He is saying there is a lawgiver. There is an ultimate judge. There is one and only one who is qualified to define what the law is, to say this is right and this is wrong. Think about it. James himself is judging them in this letter over and over again. He calls them on their sinful behavior. Last week, he called them adulteresses who had created hostility with God. Clearly, he's judging them, but he's judging them according to God's standard, according to God's law. So ultimately, it's God's law that is the judge. It's God's standard that is the basis by which right and wrong is measured. When people say, judge not lest you be judged, they're quoting Jesus in the Gospels. But they fail to realize that the context of that comment was Jesus talking to religious hypocrites who had a log in their own eye, but they were worried about the splinter in somebody else's eye. And in essence, he was saying, maybe you should worry about the law in your own eye before you worry about the splinter in somebody else's eye. In this context, James is saying that these people have abolished the royal law. They have determined that God's law is bogus, and they have instituted their own law. Therefore, now they judge their neighbor on the basis of their opinion, on the basis of their law, on the basis of their standard. And James is saying, who are you to abandon God's law and now judge people based on your own homemade standard? It's very important to understand that there is only one who has the credentials to be the lawgiver, the one who ultimately saves and the one who destroys. He has defined what is right and wrong. He has defined what is good and evil. For us as the people of God to simply say, this is what God says is right, this is what God says is wrong, is not judgmental. It's not being rigid and narrow-minded. It's simply saying, this is what the lawgiver has said. It's the law that judges them, and it's ultimately God that will stand in judgment over them as the lawgiver. Sometimes I hear people say, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree, as if God's opinion is just one of many opinions. That doesn't work with God. God is the lawgiver. You either obey him or you disobey him, but unless you yourself will be the ultimate judge that saves or destroys, you're not qualified to nullify God's law and to redefine your own law. That's what James is saying here. So let's go back to our question. Do you think you are God? If you're going to say no to that, then I assume you don't slander. I assume you don't gossip. I assume you don't trash talk people. I assume you don't backbite. I assume that your intent is not to do people harm, but rather your intent is to obey the law, to love your neighbor as yourself. Second issue, verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Now, the language in verse 13, the word saying would indicate this is something they say over and over again. It's a way of life. But we still would ask the question, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with a businessman or a businesswoman going somewhere, working hard, making a profit? The question is answered in verse 14. They do this without any awareness of God's power and presence. In other words, they have become self-sufficient. They have decided that they are in charge of their own lives. I will decide what I do. I will decide where I go. I will decide what I make for a profit. I will make myself self-sufficient. I will be sufficient because I have money in the bank. I will be sufficient because I go to the gym and work out. I have now become responsible for my own life and my own death. I'm in charge. That's the attitude that James is reflecting. And they've lost sight of the fact that actually life is but a vapor, here today, gone tomorrow. If it wasn't for God, I wouldn't even have breath today. So to carry this idea that I am self-sufficient, this idea that I can do it myself because I'm successful, because I have a certain position or a certain title or a certain amount of money, that now I'm in charge of my own destiny, is to lose sight of reality. It's in essence to become my own God. To say, I've now put myself in position of God. I will decide if I live. I will decide if I have provision. I will take care of myself.
You're listening to Back to the Bible. If you'd like to listen again, visit backtothebible.org. That's backtothebible.org. Our study continues now in James chapter 4, verse 13. Here's Bryan Clark.
Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Now, this whole idea of a vapor is an interesting concept to think about. I mean, you can think it through the grid of our own culture. People that we would say are highly successful. Let's think of a Bill Gates, billions of dollars, highly successful. But when the story is told, what did all that amount to? Right there. Go into the world of athletics. Brett Favre, great NFL quarterback. For all he's accomplished, what did it accomplish? Right there. You can move into the world of Hollywood with all their celebrities, whatever name you want in there. What James is saying is we get so impressed with ourselves as if we have really done something. Man, look at me. I am now in control of my own destiny. I've got money in the bank. I've got this job. I've got this position. I am somebody. That's about what I am right there. It amounts to nothing. If it was not for God, I would not even have breath today. This idea that I am self-sufficient is absolutely ridiculous. So what should I do? Well, verse 15. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live. And also do this and that. This is getting right to the basics. Now, this isn't some sort of a magic formula that we quote every day. It's the intent of the heart. But there's an awareness, if it's God's will, I will have breath tomorrow. That's the only guarantee I have. God is in charge. No matter how many days a week I go to the gym, no matter how careful I am about what I eat, no matter how much money I have in the bank, I cannot control whether or not tomorrow the doctor says cancer. I cannot control very much in my life. The fact of the matter is, if God says that's the end of your day today, there's nothing I can do to change that. I am not self-sufficient. I am dependent every day on God giving me life. Therefore, the idea is that I need to ask God, what do you want from me today? The reason I have life today, God, is because of you. What do you want today with my time? What do you want today with my talent? What do you want today with my treasure? That I steward every day as a gift from God. This is the heartbeat of understanding that every day matters. If the Lord wills, I will live tomorrow. But what am I going to do with that day? How am I going to steward that for God's purposes? Understanding that ultimately God is responsible for life and death. Verse 16, but as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Very interesting statement. You boast in your arrogance. What is he talking about when he's talking about our arrogance? He's talking about the fact that when we become a friend of the world, we buy into an artificial, man-made system by which we determine our value. In our arrogance, we start to define what we think gives life value. So we say, if I perform this way, if I have a certain job, if I have a certain amount of money, if I have a certain house, a certain car, certain success, whatever it might be, think about all the ways in our culture that we say someone matters. He says this in your arrogance is just an artificial standard that you've made up. But if that isn't bad enough, then you boast in the fact that when you compare yourself to your artificial, made-up standard, you think you score well, and so you boast that you're somebody. This defines our Western culture. We have created a completely artificial standard by which we measure value. And in our arrogance, we've determined we have the right to say what makes us significant and valuable. And then when we think we score well, according to the artificial standard that we've made up, we're somebody. James says that kind of boasting is just evil. That word boasting is an interesting Greek word. It only shows up 2 places in the New Testament. One is here in James. The second is in 1 John 2. when he's talking about a very similar discussion. He's defining the world as the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful, there's our word, pride of life. It's this idea that I think I'm significant. I think I'm somebody based on a completely artificial, ridiculous, made-up standard. I may have more money than anybody else on the face of the earth. There it is right there. I may be the greatest celebrity. There it is right there. I may be the world's greatest athlete. There it is right there. God is saying, that's all it is. It's completely artificial. It's made up. It amounts to nothing. The only thing that really matters is what you do with your time, your talent, and treasure as it relates to God's plan and purpose. Every day I'm asking the question, God, what do you want today? Today's a gift. And what do you want with my time? What do you want with my talent? What do you want with my treasure? Verse 17, therefore, to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. In typical, practical James fashion, he calls it what it is. If you do not love your neighbor as yourself, then you sin. If you do not steward every day your time, your talent, your treasure for God's purposes, you sin. To those who know the right thing to do, and that's the right thing to do, and do it not, to you it is sin. So let's go back to our question. Do you think you are God? If you're going to answer that question, no, then I assume you don't gossip. I assume you don't slander. I assume you don't trash talk people. I assume that you don't backbite. I assume that you don't talk about people with the intent to do them harm in your private conversations. Do you think you're God? If you're going to say no to that, then I assume that you steward every day for God's purposes, and you're constantly asking the question, God, because today is a gift from you, I really want to know, what do you want with my time? What do you want with my talent? What do you want with my treasure? If that's not how you live each day, then you don't really understand what it means to do the right thing. The right thing is to love your neighbor, and it's to steward what you've been given. To him that knows the right thing to do and do it not, to him it is sin.
Now let's join Bible teacher Bryan Clark in the studio with Back to the Bible CEO Arnie Cole and author Kara Whitney.
So, Bryan, I don't know if I've heard you say it, but I've heard a lot of pastors say, yep, I didn't write the book, and I just preach from it. And, we simply submit to the idea that God makes the rules and that people either obey or disobey them, and we're not judging them when they sin. God makes that judgment for us, right?
Yeah, so just for clarity, I have said that too.
Yes, I knew it wasn't an original thought on my part.
Right, it's in the book. So I think Christians in a culture of relativism need to be willing to stand their ground, that God says there's absolute truth and there's that which is right and that which is wrong. So when we affirm that, we're not judging them. God's judging them. We're just simply being clear on what God has said. I think it's really different when we're starting to judge maybe gray areas where the scriptures aren't so clear, or we're judging motives or hard issues. But our culture's full of stuff that people are clearly doing that violate God's commandments. And part of our responsibility as salt and light is to tell the truth.
Right. I always say, what do you think about this? It doesn't matter what I think. This is what God says about it.
Right.
So I like to pass the buck to God because he's bigger. The temptation to be our own God is pretty subtle. But you're right, it shows up pretty often in the way we live our lives. This problem goes back to Genesis and that lie of the enemy, right?
Yeah. We talked about it in Genesis. The enemy is crafty, but he's not all that original. So he's still using the same basic lies. And James talks about the temptation. It's the temptation we all face as people made in the image of God, is to be our own God and to run our own lives. And I think we can't underestimate how daily we are saturated with the world's value system, the voices of the world. It's overwhelming. And because of that, I think our default mode is to be like the world. And we have to make very intentional choices to submit and surrender to God's will in our life.
So, I like to start every day asking God what he wants me to do. And sometimes if I'm on a roll, I'll even pray, Lord, help me to stay out of your way today. At the same time, though, you want to do God's will. You want to get out of his way every day. But then you have all of these tasks that you have to get done. And especially if you're kind of more type A, you try to make things happen. And I'm not talking in a sinful way. I'm talking even ministry-wise. How do we get past this type of thinking?
Well, I think it's a daily intentional effort. So I would say one of the things I struggle with is self-sufficiency. I'm not out there trying to do sinful things and offend God. I'm wanting to do the right things, and I'm wanting to do them the right way, but can tend to do them in my own power and hope God catches up and blesses my wonderful efforts. But I think the challenge is it's a daily choice, and really to think in terms of today. We can spend a lot of times thinking about tomorrow and the future. It's like, what matters today? And what does God want from me today? There's just no way you're going to get to the end of your life and live a life for the things that matter if you don't do that every single day. It's the little moments in life that ultimately add up and matter. So today matters. And what is it about today that matters? And I don't want to miss the moments. I think at the end of life, you're going to look back and see life was primarily made up in the moments. It wasn't the big events. It was the little moments that you have with your kids or your spouse or your friends, and moments that will last, moments that matter.
Thanks for taking time to be with us today. If you'd like to listen to this message again, please visit us at backtothebible.org. That's backtothebible.org. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more of Bryan Clark's teaching, right here on Back to the Bible.